Well, good morning, everybody. This is the HEPI UCAS webinar on this year's results and admissions round. I'm just going to give it 30 seconds for the number of participants to stop climbing. It's climbing very fast at the moment, and then we'll kick off properly. Just give it a few more seconds because the numbers are still climbing. So they're still going up, but I'm going to 1 minute past, so I'm going to kick off because we want to keep this short and snappy. And I'm absolutely delighted that we're doing this for a second year. My name's Nick Hillman. I'm director of HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, which is the UK's only specialist think tank for HE, but you probably know that because you'll have come here via registering on our website. And so we're doing this webinar this morning with our partners at UCAS, and we're going to hear in a moment from Clare Marchant, the CEO at UCAS, who has had a very varied career in the public sector, as CEO of Worcestershire County Council, in time in the NHS, and also in the private sector, in management consulting and rank overs McDougall. But most of us in higher education, of course, know Clare best from her time as head of UCAS, where she's been for a couple of years now. But in torrid times, Clare, much of the period you've been there. So the format of today is Clare's going to make some opening remarks, tell us how the world looks from UCAS HQ. Claire's speaking to us today from Worcestershire, but how the world looks from the UCAS perspective. And then I will put a small number of questions to Clare. We've built this as an in-conversation event, but actually we want it to be truly participatory. So there will be an opportunity for you as attendees to put your questions to Clare. If you put questions in the Q&A, I'll monitor that, and I'll also, if the tech holds up, we'll see if we can turn on your microphone so you can ask your own questions if you're happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll read out your question. So do please use the Q&A, both as Clare's talking and as I'm chatting to Clare, and afterwards. And therefore, with no further ado, Clare, in this exceptional year, I think I'm as excited as everybody else to know what it is you think we all need to know about what's going to happen in the next fortnight or so. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And it is my fifth confirmation and clearing. So I know it feels like I've only been around a couple of years, but I sort of feel like I've seen quite a few now. But as you say, feels again unprecedented, a year like no other in so many different ways. And you know, I think it's different to last year. So in terms of, we actually have planned for teacher assessed grades across the UK. We have a single results day, which I vehemently believe is in the best interests of the students. So those A levels, AS levels, Scottish results, and those vocational technical qualifications all on the same day. And we are emerging, albeit you know, very sensitively, we are merging with steps from the pandemic, which of course was not the case last year. And very often, and certainly leading an organisation like UCAS, sometimes emerging from the pandemic feels more complex in some ways than that initial lockdown back in March 2020. I was going to just, in the context of this year, touch on some things that we are seeing as we go towards that big results day a week on Tuesday. And the first thing is we started to ramp up during the course of last year and have continued into this year monitoring student sentiment. So what are students thinking? What are they feeling? Because ultimately we all work in the best interests of students. And we've done that again this year, and just a couple of weeks was our last sort of set of surveys and focus groups with students, and actually some marked differences in terms of those students and how they're feeling compared to the same cohort, the equivalent cohort at this time last year. So we know that 80% of them are actually feeling confident in teacher assessed grades. We do know that over 3/4 of them are feeling confident about taking the next step, confident about starting in the autumn. We do know that those who aren't feeling so confident are concerned about flexibility, and I'll come back to that in terms of flexibility of the sector and universities. And I think that's going to be a big word for the next 2 weeks, is that flexibility. And I know, talking to admissions professionals up and down the 4 nations, that is something they are working very, very hard to achieve. They are less anxious than last year. You know, we had last year less than half of them feeling really excited. We're back at that 3/4 now. So I do think we're in a much better place in terms of students and how they're feeling about the 10th. Obviously, there'll be pockets of students, I think, that are perhaps more concerned than others, particularly if you're a student who's thinking about going to perhaps a more selective institution or a more selective course, or a course that requires a placement, because of course they might look back on last year, or have heard about last year and some of the very hard work that universities and colleges put in at the back end of the summer. So there may be pockets that we see where students aren't happy. We do have to remember that every year, whilst we have the majority elated, we do have pockets of students who perhaps don't get into what they want. But overall, student sentiment looking really high. And I'll come on to perhaps how clearing might play out in a minute. In terms of, I suppose, one to watch this year, and I would say this is for me, this is the thing to keep an eye on as we go through what will be daily reporting from Results Day. We issue figures out on things like widening access and widening participation, and some of those where we're seeing the places go. And I think widening access for me is a really big one to watch. We have seen in terms of applications at the 30th of June, which is our last point of really sort of measuring in the cycle before Results Day, we have seen increases in numbers from the most disadvantaged areas, but equally we've also seen further increases, so proportionally more increase from those that are most advantaged. So I just think that gap between the most advantaged students, the most disadvantaged students, which has been reducing over a number of years, we want to keep an eye on that this year, because I think, you know, everybody has been disadvantaged by the pandemic, but there is a danger that we have those most disadvantaged fall behind. And I know universities are working really hard with student support and you know, step-up programs and all those sorts of things. So what's clearing going to look like? Well, we actually only have 7 working days to go to the point of Results Day, but of course clearing has been open since the 5th of July, so for quite a period now, and we have seen those direct to clearing applicants coming through. If you remember back to last year, in terms of those that got places through clearing, it was a record high. It was over 80,000. It probably won't reach 100,000 this year, but I would anticipate over the next year or two that could be the case. You know, around 30,000 courses again in clearing this year. So our advice for students is very much going to be, we probably expect record numbers to get their first choice, which is great. But then if you don't get your first choice, you know, look at your insurance, look at your other choices, and look at what options are available to you, both in clearing, but obviously we've enhanced again Clearing Plus, which suggests and recommends to students different options that might be appropriate based on their previous choices. So what's the day going to look like? I've said it's a single results day. Usually I'm deep in the heart of Scotland around now, visiting universities, listening into calls and seeing how Scottish Results Day is going. Of course, it's all happening on the one day this year. And so we will have students who'll be getting their teacher assessed grades and logging into UCAS systems at 8:30 in the morning to find out if they've got into the place that they most wanted to get into. I think the one thing that I would say this year that we are pushing very hard on is not just exploring options through Clearing Plus and through the Clearing search list, but also options around apprenticeships. And we're carrying some banners around our Career Finder tool, which we know there's massive demand for that at the moment, with about 1.3 million searches in it just over the course of the last year. So matching students to degree and higher apprenticeships. So in summary, I think it's going to be a different year. I don't know if I'd use the word exciting, because my message to students is that they should go forward for their next step, and they seem to be absolutely in that headspace in terms of looking forward. Assure them that if they're one of the minority who don't get their first choice, university admissions teams are working superbly hard to make sure there is flexibility. They look at everything, not just those grades, the personal statement, the reference. And for the first time this year, we have free school meals data that university admissions professionals have access to help with that sort of watch point on widening access and participation. I'm getting out and about. I was in Exeter and London this week, speaking to universities in both of those cities, and the amount of preparation that has gone in, not just from UCAS teams on social media and call centres, but from those admissions teams, is phenomenal. So I think, I'm hoping it's going to be a steady period over the course of the next 7 days and beyond, and then seeing through to a term start, which we all hope is going to have less of the restrictions than we've seen over the course of the last 18 months. Nick, with that, I'll probably leave it there. I've gone on for a good 10 minutes and open it to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to put a few questions to you, and then we'll move to the questions that are coming in the Q&A. And the first question, just a couple of points of clarification that I'm interested in, and I hope others are too. Obviously, the teacher assessed grades, the tags that are being used this year, different to any year before. I mean, are we right to assume they're sort of 99.9% of the time exactly the same as UCAS predicted grades?
No, I don't think that's a correct assumption to make, because of course predicted grades can be made at any point, usually ahead of that January equal consideration deadline, which was the end of January this year rather than the middle of January. Now, obviously there was a lockdown period from that January through to not the whole period, but a large portion of when they would have given the teacher assessed grades up through awarding bodies to Ofqual. But there could have been progression between that January point, that December point, and when the teacher assessed grades was arrived at. Equally, there could have been deterioration, and so teachers will have been looking at the coursework, or they might have had some exams as soon as those students went back after that third lockdown finished. So I think probably there is a correlation, obviously, but probably not the sort of 99% that's been talked about.
Yeah, and of course, I guess it's a point in people's lives where they're changing very fast.
Absolutely, 6 months in an 18-year-old's life, a lot longer than my age.
You said, I was intrigued that you said in your remarks that this year's entrants are in many respects in a better place than when we did this time last year. I suppose the counter argument to that is that their learning has been more disrupted because they've had both their year 12 and their year 13 seriously disrupted. So they may arrive at university, I'm guessing, just less well prepared, even if in many respects the system of admissions is smoother this year than it was last year.
Yeah, and I was definitely talking about the system of admissions, Nick. I think, in terms of their disrupted learning, and I speak to lots of students. It's been an awful year at any stage of your school journey, but particularly at this stage. But I do go back to universities and colleges. Most who I speak to are doing, catch-up programs. Some of them will start a few days early in terms of term, and particularly catch-up programs. I'm talking about some of the courses where they feel that is needed. So, and also in terms of student support. I mean, I lead an organisation of around 450 people. People of all walks of life. Some of them are nervous about coming back into the real, the face-to-face world and going back into offices. We're going to have the same thing with our applicant and student base. Some of them will be very keen for those social life and the sports life that accompanies universities. Some of them will be very nervous and anxious, and that's where universities are investing in student support.
Yeah, I guess any transition point is difficult in a crisis, I guess. Could you say a little word about gender? Because HEPI and, of course, lots of other organisations have been writing for many years about a growing gap in university entry between young men and young women. And I don't know if you can give us any indication of whether you expect that to continue. It's something that gives us some concern.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to buck the trend this year in terms of that gap between young men and young women. And it's been fairly consistent over the last five to 8 years. I mean, one of the things that we've done is on gender is go back and look at what subjects males and females are taking, because I still think below the sort of headline statement that more women go to university or go to more selective universities than men, actually more women are still doing what would be classified as traditional female subjects, so nursing and education, and more men do engineering and computing. And we have to start working with those stereotypes much earlier. Tackling this problem at 17, 18, in my view, is absolutely not the right thing to do. That gender gap starts as far as early years, all the way through Key Stage 2. So I think it's that work that we need to do. And coming from, you mentioned in my intro, coming from a local authority background, it's working with the local authorities and the school settings and the nursery settings where we'll start to break some of that gender gap, not starting at age 16, 17.
Thank you. I'm going to put 3 more quick questions to you, and then we'll move to the questions coming in the Q&A. So the bulk of the session will be audience participation. But could I just ask you about appeals? I mean, some of us worry that there will be masses and masses and masses of appeals this year, because although many people will have got the grades they want and they need, the appeal system is going to be relatively straightforward, and there isn't a lot to lose by putting in an appeal. And could that clog up the system, or is that a fear that's not as big as I'm making it?
I think if you'd have asked me 3 or 4 weeks ago, Nick, I'd have said this is one of our key concerns. I think it's diminishing over time. I think we just need to look at the sort of provisional preliminary grades in Scotland and Wales, and have they had a tsunami of appeals there? Anecdotally, no. And also, I do think, and we will start to, we're doing Facebook Lives all the time with students, but actually they can go down as well as up. For England at least. And so understanding that, and if we have record numbers, 80% plus get their first place, you've really got to be, it's going to be a small cohort that I think that go into the appeals territory. We've worked with universities to slightly extend the advisory deadline to hold out for appeals coming through just slightly into what would be the school term, so the first week in September. But I'm hopeful that we don't see the worry that I had a number of weeks ago, which is a tsunami of appeals in England.
So what other things do keep you awake? If that doesn't keep you awake at night, what other things do keep you awake at night between now and the 10th of August?
So one of the things I suppose, and perhaps I learnt this in my local government days, or perhaps even back to consulting, is I believe we work best as a sector when we all work together. So whether that's the governments of the 4 nations, whether that's the regulators, the awarding bodies, Universities UK, mission groups, representative groups, etc. If we all work together, we do best by students. What tends to keep me awake is when people are rowing their own boat independently and not talking to each other, and the lack of communication can keep me awake. I have to say, we haven't had that this year. There has been concerted efforts by all of those parties to really work together in terms of students. But as soon as I start to see a fracture, it gives me a bit of a restless night. But I tend to sleep quite well. I confess, I'm a runner, so I'm usually exhausted.
And the final question from me, PQA Julie, so big policy debate about post-qualification admissions, post-qualification applications. There's lots of different models. They do things differently in different countries. UCAS has said quite a lot about this on the record in the past. The government seems quite keen to introduce a new admission system. Can you just very briefly give us a sense of where UCAS currently is on this debate?
Yeah, I mean, I truly believe that the debate is not binary. It is not full-blown post-qualification admissions or stay as you are. And what we have tried to do over the course of the last, and it's nearly 2 years now that we've been actively working on it. And of course, my predecessors did a load of work back in 2012-13 as well. So it's not the first time we've done work on this. But what we've tried to do over the last 18 months is really get the nuance of it. And so coming up with a post-qualification offer making, where that whole exploration application is done as it is today over a longer period, but offers and decisions are made after results, we think is a more nuanced position. It's pragmatic and it potentially could be implemented. However, it's still got challenges, and we have to work through those challenges, international students being one of them, but also widening access. And secondly, it's going to take time to implement. So knee-jerking into any model, I think, would be very dangerous.
Fantastic. So thank you for that clear answer. And now I'm going to start moving to the questioners from the audience. I would ask people, both asking questions and obviously you as well, Claire, to be as crisp as we can, because then we can get through as many points as we can. And I'm keen to get through as many as we can in the second half of this session. We've got 20 minutes left. I'm going to go first to someone who submitted a question in advance of the session, which was the journalist John O'Leary. John, are you there? I'm hoping Emma's going to try and turn on your microphone. Otherwise, I will read out your...
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Hi. Oh, hi, Claire. I was interested in the prospects for clearing in the high tariff universities, given that their offer rate is considerably lower than it has been in previous years, and we're looking at higher applications and more deferrals. Do you think that means that the availability of places is going to be predominantly in the medium and low tariff institutions?
Great question, John. No, I don't, is the short answer. I think there will be plenty of choice at higher tariff, more selective institutions. There will be pockets, as I alluded to earlier, where you might not get choice where you had it in previous years. But with 30,000 courses, it won't just be recruiting universities as opposed to selective that will have choices there. So I do see, still boundless choice this year, but there will be pockets that just aren't there. But that will be because more people are going in. So, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And as you say, application rates are up. I think you mentioned offer making, John, and I think that's variable, is what we see across institutions. Some institutions will be have been very ambitious in their offer making. Some will have held back because of obviously the tags are an unknown quantity. But I think we'll see a really fair spread in clearing this year.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you, John. I'm going to go to Julie Kelly now, who's the first question in the Q&A, and then we'll go to Vincenzo.
Hi, Claire. Hi, Nick. Really, just as a admissions professional, just looking for reassurance about UCAS's ability to cope with this big day. As you say, it's quite a different day for you, and I suppose just wondering what sort of contingency planning and testing you've been doing in advance to make sure everything's going to be up and working on the morning of the 10th.
And Julie, just remind us which institution you're from.
So University of Hertfordshire. I'm the academic registrar.
We've met Julie. Thanks, great question. Another great question. So I'm not going to go into all the test regimes because I will be here for quite a long time. But in terms of scaling up, and that's the big thing, Julie. I mean, there's two elements to this. One is scaling up and one is the cyber element. And those are the two, if I had to bring it down to two sort of risks, that's where we are. I'm confident in terms of the scaling up. We've scaled up 4 or 5 times over what was last year, which was a record. We're looking at the sort of detail we're looking at is if all 700,000 applicants all dialed on in the same minute. So that's the sort of level of detail, or in the same second, where would our systems be? So on that, I am confident. I think the cyber risks for any organisation and are there. and we have our own ways of mitigating and managing and scenario planning around that I wouldn't want to go into. But I would encourage all organisations in this world of cyber threats to be very, very cautious over this period.
Thank you, Claire. Let's go to Vincenzo. If we can get his microphone to work. It's a question about India. Apparently Indian exam results came out today. I wasn't aware of that. Vincenzo.
Hi, if you can hear me, then I've got a general question about international students and what you're seeing on the international front, Claire, and then a more specific question in relation to India. When I was an international recruiter, I always saw clearings starting in May when the Indian exam results came out. They came out this year about an hour ago, an hour and a half ago. What are you expecting from India? Will your lines be open over the weekend? And kind of generally what to expect on the international front?
Yeah, another great question. So internationally, still seeing demand holding up. You're aware of that. Up 14% from last year. So year on year increasing. EU a bit of an exception to that, obviously. I think there's two things, as well as obviously the China and India dominance in terms of international coming through. We are seeing diversification. So the likes of Nigeria was up 66%, Ghana up nearly a third. So you're seeing new nations coming through in terms of real appetite for UK HE, which I hope will hold through the cycle. Obviously, those stats are as we saw them at the 30th of June. In terms of India specifically, again, up a third. So we've really got appetite coming through from India. We have got support as we go forward over weekends. Sometimes that's more social media, depending on time difference of different countries, than it is call centre support, but we have call centre support definitely over the course of next weekend. So we've thought through each of the countries and how we give them sort of wraparound support. Increasingly, and this is for international students as well as for UK students, social media is direct messaging, whether that's through Instagram or our new, we're now on TikTok and Twitter. Absolutely is what students want. They want that interaction through an instant message rather than necessarily picking up the phone. I think picking up the phone is a little bit old school for the likes of for me now. But massive appetite, and there will be support.
Thank you, Claire. Don't they say that making a phone call is only the 5th or 6th most common thing you do on a phone these days, after all the other things? So I'm going to go to Ross Renton next, who of course is on a very interesting journey with his institution in Peterborough. Ross.
Hi, Claire. And just first of all, thank you, Claire and the team at UCAS, for all you're doing every year. I know it's a military task. My question's around do we think, given all that's happened over the past 18 months or longer now, there's enough information and support for applicants who may have advantage from deferring for a year, taking a bit more time, and also considering different modes of study, whether it be part-time, distance, or degree apprentices? Things have changed a lot since they put that initial application in, and is there more we can do to try and get them to think about other options?
So great to speak to you, Ross. Hope all's going well in Peterborough. I follow you on LinkedIn and associated channels. It seems to be growing brilliantly. I think there's more we can do, is the short answer, Ross. I think that parity of whether it's apprenticeships, part-time learning, if you think about the lifelong learning entitlement coming in 2025, there's definitely more we can do in terms of information, advice and guidance around that. I would like to see people coming to UCAS and exploring a myriad of different options rather than coming to UCAS for the traditional 3-year undergraduate degree only. Now that is one, and it's a big choice in people's lives, but that's one of a number of choices. So I think there's more we can do. I would say, Ross, I think, and I count UCAS in this, but I think as a sector, we need to talk to our applicants in channels and language and vocab and with people who they relate to. I think there's too much of talking down to and perhaps not talking in the channels and the vocab that they want. So a lot of our push will be through the social media channels, increasingly Facebook Live, slicing and dicing content, reusing it, getting hero content, on-demand content. That's where we need to get really good, both for traditional undergraduate degrees and for the other options that you outlined.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Claire. I'm going to go to Dennis Sherwood next, who many of you will have read his work on the HEPI website about the accuracy or not of the grades that people are given. Dennis, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, and good morning, Claire and Nick. Nick, picking up your cue there, Claire, if I may, my question is about grades, looking ahead to when exams come back, probably in the summer of 22. Now, as I'm sure you know, Dr. Jo Saxton, the new chief regulator of Ofqual, was interviewed by the Select Committee just a few weeks ago. One of the questions he was asked referred to the statement made by her predecessor, Dame Glenys Stacey, that school exam grades are reliable to one grade either way. The question that was asked to Jo Saxton was, is one grade either way reliable enough? I was just wondering from a UCAS, if not wider perspective, Claire, is a reliability of exam grades, one grade either way, reliable enough, or if not, what might be done about it, please?
It's a great question, and I think in the context, I will answer it, Dennis, in the context of higher education admissions. Obviously, one grade either way or which way it's a broader question than just those looking to go into higher education. In terms of higher education admissions, it probably is enough because, as I said in my opening remarks, most universities now will take other things into account. So there will be grades, but there will also be, personal statement, what I would call perhaps near-miss candidates, which is not a particularly nice sort of phrase, but where you've dropped maybe 1, maximum 2 grades. They will look at personal statements. They will look at extenuating circumstances in the reference. The fact that we've got free school meals data, I think, helps in terms of that widening access angle. So I think it's not the sort of guillotine of you've got to get these grades, and if you miss it one, then your chances are completely out. Obviously, this year is slightly different, so I'm sort of talking in response to your question, Dennis, for next year onwards and how those near misses look then. But I think in terms of the context of higher admissions, it is enough. And also just the plethora of choice you've got now, even at the higher tariff institutions.
Thank you. I know there's lots more that could be said about that, but I'm going to keep on going through because we've had lots of questions in to Johnny Rich. And Johnny, tell people where you're from because you wear various hats, don't you?
Yeah, hi. Well, I guess my question today is wearing my Push hat. Push is an outreach organisation. And I wanted to ask about dropout rates and clearing, because there's a long-standing correlation between the institutions that accept the most students through clearing and those with the highest dropout rates. Do you think that the connection is causal or not? Because causation is, as we know, correlation is not causation. In other words, does going through clearing raise a student's risk of dropping out? And is that risk likely to be higher or lower this year, if there is such a risk? Especially given that far fewer applicants this year will have had a chance to visit universities in advance.
Well, if I take it out of the context of this year for a moment, Johnny, in terms of in a normal year, if we say, and I definitely think, and I would split clearing, getting a place in clearing, into those that come direct into clearing for the first time, and those that have been on a research journey for 18 months and actually end up making a choice in clearing, having not had one of their 5 choices of the place they're going to go. And I think there's probably a difference between the two, I would say. So I think there is some causation if you are, if you are basically changing your choices. But if you've chosen it, if you've looked at it already, so I've chose University X, but I went to University X and I saw it back in April. So switching to that gives me, I'm confident with that. One of the things we say to students, and directly because I think there might be a cause, is don't knee-jerk on that results day. When track opens at 3 o'clock, just talk to the university first. 48 hours, 24 hours of research even, just understanding a little bit of city, use one of our city guides and look at the course, talk to one of the unibuddy peers or whatever. So I think there is a bit of causation there, Johnny, which is why we do give that advice. On your point about this year, I think that it probably accentuates this year because of that lack of being able to go to open days and see places. Although I know since lockdown 3, lifted, there have been lots of student ambassadors up and down all 4 countries taking people, round campuses in a sort of socially distant way. So I think we underestimate that quite a lot has happened. We've had virtual events going on that you've still got people coming to who are going into start in the autumn. So
thank you. I'm going to move now to Patrick Bailey. Patrick.
Hi there. Just checking you can hear me.
We can perfectly.
Terrific. Okay. So on behalf essentially of million+ universities, many of them, the majority of them, will pick up 60 to 80% of their students through the main round, and then a really significant percentage through clearing. I think, Claire, the advice to students not to rush into the decisions has played out very well, and we've seen more of a switch to a longer period of time where students 2 or 3 weeks, often 5 or 6 weeks after the results are out, making the decisions. Have you a sense this year, because it does tend to sort of go one way or the other, is there a sense that there might be a panic to get everything resolved in the first 2 or 3 days so that there is that sort of rapid decision making, or do you think it's going to be a much more extended process?
Thanks, Pat. I absolutely think it'll be a little bit more extended, and partly because results day is so much earlier in August this year. So, typically it would have been the week after. So I think that you've got more of August to run through. I think will benefit it having a bit of a sort of a longer tail, but extending over weeks rather than that sort of immediate dash in days. And we will continue, Pat, in terms of our messaging, which is about, don't panic. Results day is on a Tuesday, of course, this year. So you've got that week to sort of work through your choices. And that's still, a very timely decision if you're making a decision on a Friday of that week or something. But I think we'll see, as you said, 2 or 3 weeks of continued activity, as there was last year. Although last year was a little bit different.
Yeah, it was. But yeah.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Claire. I'm going to go to Will Hazel now, who's a journalist. I'm then going to go after Will, and after Claire's answered Will, to Catherine Clark. We're not going to go through all the questions in the last 5 minutes. So if people want particular questions to be asked, do upvote them, and I'll see that they're more popular than other questions, and we'll make sure we get to them. So Will, next, please.
Thanks, Nick, and hi, Claire. Just got a question about conversations between students and universities, or schools and universities, ahead of results day. You'd have seen that report in the Sunday Times from a few weekends ago about schools, apparently private schools, contacting universities on behalf of students who are near misses. I wonder whether that's something you've picked up and if it's something which concerns you. And then also, as you mentioned, Scotland and Wales students have received provisional results. Are you concerned that students will have had conversations with universities potentially, and so they might be ahead of the game, if you like, of students in England?
Great, thanks, Will. So on the first point about effectively, parents, teachers lobbying universities, I don't know a university that will have any time for that at all. So it doesn't concern me, because I just don't think, university professionals, admissions professionals work as we do for a fair and transparent admissions service, and they won't have any rook with that at all. So that's the first thing. To be fair, Will, on your second point, again, several weeks ago, I was perhaps worried about that. We haven't seen any evidence of that, and certainly universities have held very firm on that. So as we, are now 7 days away, I am much less concerned about that, and there's no evidence it's happening. So again, it was one of my sort of 8 weeks ago. I was very concerned about it, but I don't think we're going to see it.
Thank you, Claire. Let's go to Catherine now. Catherine, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, Claire. It's Catherine from the University of Exeter. Great to know that you were down in the southwest recently. In the context of what you were reflecting on in relation to gender, it just made me want to ask you really, what do you see as UCAS's role in supporting informed course choice? And I'm really asking in the context of the government's recent noises about future support for some arts and humanities, and looking for an assurance that there'll be a degree of neutrality, I suppose, from UCAS in relation to what could be becoming a rather conflicted kind of STEM versus HUMS future discourse.
Mm. And what a shame if it becomes STEM versus humanities, because each have their place. So you can have an absolute guarantee from me, Catherine, everything we do in terms of information, advice and guidance will be independent. So that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say in terms of your first part of your question, what will we be doing? One of the Where Next reports we put out probably 6 or 8 weeks ago now was looking about choices and when university choices started to be shaped. And that fact that actually about a third of students, even as early as year 6 in primary, are starting to rule in or out university. And that means when they're in year 8 and year 9 and they're making GCSE choices or equivalent, they are ruling in or out courses and potential careers. So I think our role is to not just work with 16, 17-year-olds, but get to right back with our information, advice and guidance into early secondary across all 4 nations. And make sure that we're giving that trusted, independent advice about subjects and your subject choices and how that informs future careers. So, and we've got, we've got data that can help inform that on a data-driven way.
Thank you, Claire. Now we are sort of bang on actually where we're meant to wind up, but I don't know if I can beg for 2 more minutes of your time, Claire, because there's some very interesting questions, and I'll read them out in a clump, and you can decide. And I'm not going to do, there won't be time to read all of them, I'm afraid. I'll just do the ones that have been upvoted a lot. So there's a question actually by Johnny Rich, who's already asked one, but it's the top one in the terms of upvoting, about contextual admissions. And he's asking whether there's now a gap, a policy gulf between support, I guess, in the sector for contextual admissions versus what seems to be a bit of skepticism about contextual admissions from government. He specifically refers to the candidate pack for Chris Smallwood's replacement. Another one that's been upvoted a lot is around the removal of BTECs as a route to higher education. Big news in the news this week. And then 2 more, and then I will hand over to you. One is that there's been a record number of applicants and offers this year, as you referred to, but come results day with grade inflation, etc., etc., will there be universities turning down offer holders? I guess a little bit like what Exeter's doing with some of their medical students, if the media reports are accurate, trying to persuade them to defer. And then the final question is on double jabbing students. It sounds as if the question's posed by someone who's quite skeptical that this is an appropriate thing for universities to do. I don't know if it's actually something that UCAS would have a policy on anyway, but nonetheless, do you see issues around universities insisting that students are double jabbed when some students may not want to be, or maybe cannot be, or maybe come from countries where jabs haven't been rolled out? So I don't know if you can cover all of those, but see how you do.
Yeah, great. I mean, I'll actually probably take them in reverse order because I've probably got least to say about the last and then most to say about the first. So we'll take them like that. So I think on the double jabbing piece, it really isn't for UCAS to state on this. We will follow Public Health England and Department of Health and Social Care. And we work very closely with both of those organisations. It may be that if there is a statement that we would hold it on ucas.com, that we would point to it in our results day emails to students. But it's not really for UCAS to be taking a policy stance on whether to go into a large lecture theatre, students need to be double jabbed or not. So that's probably the easiest of those 4 questions, because it's something that we will play our part in, but it's not ours to decide. I think in terms of the questions around turning down offer holders, which was the 3rd question, there's potential that you will see, and you referenced the Exeter, I know Catherine's on the call, but the Exeter that made the news, the offer, I think it was 10,000 plus accommodation or something like that. I think there will be some incentives, whether they're at that level. It was quite an attractive incentive. There will be some incentives potentially where you've got hotspots or pressure points. But again, you do have some of that in any year. And I think just pull back to the level of deferrals in 2020 versus 2019, they weren't significantly up. universities bent over backwards to accommodate those, once we reverted to CAGs last year, those students coming through. So I think I'm more confident that universities will be as flexible as they possibly can, and that will be very, very limited, I think, in response to that person that's asking the question. But we may see some of it. I'm flying through these, Nick, because I'm aware of time. In terms of the removal of BTECs, I think this needs really careful thinking through, because T-levels are still, and I, until recently, I was on the Gloucestershire Local Enterprise Partnership, and that's one of the ones that's piloting T-levels, and they are still new, and I do think there's something about, I'm a great advocate of change, innovation, change, keep pushing forward, particularly in the education sector, because I think it's so much opportunity. But at the same time, do you want to change everything all at the same time? And I just think it's we need some caution. Again, a little bit like my answer to Nick's question about post-qualification admissions. Don't change everything at once. Do it in a planned, thorough, meaningful way. And it feels a little bit like everything could change in the technical vocational space all at the same time. And I don't think that would be helpful for students, because actually students want certainty a little bit ahead. On contextual admissions, Johnny, great question. I think this is a debate that will continue to rumble, particularly either in a post-qualifications debate or outside of that. I do think the free school meals move, which the Westminster government has worked hard to achieve. I think that's supported. I think that's really, really positive, because we've never had that before, and UCAS have been looking to achieve that for years, probably predating my time. I think there is something about how we define contextual admissions, and we talk about it and sort of bandy it about as a phrase. Actually, in the personal statement, there's contextual data. In the reference, there's contextual data. We pass contextual data over all the time. So there is context around a student that is being used currently. So again, I see it on a bit of a spectrum. In regards to Johnny's question about, is the sector in one place and the government in another place? I think there are differences in terms of the extent of contextual admissions and how it's used versus the extent of the academic conditions of the offer. But the balance is the important thing for me. And making sure that when we use contextual admissions, we're using them appropriately. So sorry, Johnny, you probably wanted a bit more of a binary answer, that I'm for everything in contextual admissions or I'm against it. And I'm not in that space. I'm in a used appropriately at the moment, and working with the sector to give them incrementally more of that to be able to keep widening access.
Well, thank you, Claire. I'm going to call a halt to proceedings here, even though I know we could have gone on longer. And in fact, we've gone on 15 minutes longer, 50% longer than we did last year, and a little bit over our time. And I'm doing that because of the feedback we get on these events, as people like short, snappy events of the sort we've got. I know that means we haven't come to some of the, particularly the questions posed by anonymous attendees. We will save the Q&A, and we will share that with UCAS, so at least UCAS are aware of, obviously you can't reply if the person's anonymous, but are aware of the issues that are coming up, and we will digest those at HEPI as well. So I just want to end by thanking Claire. You've been so open and lucid and evidence rich in your responses, and I think we wish you all the best for the next 10 days or fortnight, just as we wish the applicants and the admissions officers all the best. And thank you also to your colleagues Jane and David for helping set this up. And I also want to particularly thank my colleague Emma, who doesn't officially work on Fridays, but has been there at the back end, making sure the tech doesn't collapse, turning on people's microphones, helping set up today as well. So thank you, Emma. And thank you to everyone else for attending. We will make a recording of this available on our website, hopefully within the next couple of hours, if the tech allows us to do that. And do please stay in touch. The next HEPI report, by the way, we're not pausing over the summer. The next HEPI report will be out on Thursday next week, which is a collection of essays on the student voice. How do we make sure the student voice is part of higher education policy making? And we've got 13 very diverse, very interesting authors, so do please look out for that. Thank you once again, Claire, and everyone have a nice summer. This is our last event of this academic year, so thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you all.